Hello and welcome to this workshop on losing weight without dieting. My name's Roz Watkins and I'm the creator of the Enlighten programme, which is a non-diet weight loss programme. So the research on diets is now really clear that basically they don't work for long-term weight loss. They might work for, you might lose weight for maybe 6 months, but if you look at a period of 1 year, 2 years or 5 years, they've now found that most people end up fatter than if they hadn't bothered dieting at all. So there's some research that's been carried out recently at California University, and they looked at hundreds and hundreds of different diets and thousands of people who dieted. And the unfortunate conclusion and the recommendation that they passed to Medicare was that diets shouldn't be funded because they don't work. And in fact, out of obese people, more than 80% of them ended up fatter than the control group who hadn't even tried to diet at all. So just to clarify, by a diet, what I mean is anything that restricts the amount of food you eat so that you're not eating to your own hunger, or anything that restricts the number of calories you eat, or that says that you've got to choose low energy foods without much fat. I don't mean just choosing healthy options or natural options. I mean actually restricting your intake of food and the number of calories or amount of energy that you're eating. Now, another interesting experiment on the effect of dieting was actually carried out during the Korean War. And they had a group of conscientious objectors, and basically as an alternative to going to war, these guys were used in an experiment on the effects of dieting. So what they did was they took a group of men who they'd never had any problems with food before. They have a variety of weights, but healthy, generally slim, and no problems with food. And what they did was they put them on a restricted calorie diet. And it was actually 1,500 calories, so really by today's standards, reasonably generous for a diet. But it was low fat, 1,500 calorie a day diet. And then they just observed the men and just saw how they coped. And basically they didn't cope very well at all. They became completely obsessed with food. They were thinking about it all the time, they were dreaming about food, they were talking about food. They also became quite depressed, and one guy was actually so distraught by the experience that he chopped off his own finger in an attempt to be released from the experiment. And the interesting thing was that even after the experiment was finished and the guys were free to go off and eat what they liked, they found that a large proportion of them still had real problems with food. So quite a lot of them were eating up to 10,000 calories a day. They just couldn't eat enough after having been restricted. And these effects went on for many, many months after the end of the dieting period. So 1,500 calories a day, it's not like they were being starved, but it had a really serious effect on their relationship with food. So why don't diets work? I mean, it seems common sense they ought to work. People think, especially thin people, that if you're overweight, just eat a bit less, do a bit more exercise, and you'll lose weight. It's obvious. The problem is that our bodies are basically set up to not allow us to diet, to not allow us to lose weight, because when you diet, it sends a message to your body that there's a shortage of food. And of course, for most of our evolution, that did happen. There were famines, there were genuine food shortages. And the people who just lost all their weight and eventually died, obviously they're not the ones who survived to reproduce and evolve into us. So our bodies are very well adapted to slow our metabolic rate down and conserve energy when there's a famine. And when there's a famine, it's even more important to make sure that as soon as there is some food, you store it as fat so you don't waste it. So what happens when you diet? Your body thinks, oh my God, famine, your metabolic rate slows by up to 40%, and you lose muscle as well as fat. Now the thing about muscle is it uses a lot more energy than fat when it's simply resting. So by losing muscle, it takes less energy to keep you going, which was great sort of 20,000 years ago when there was a famine. But now it's not so good, because once you finish the diet and you start eating again, you've got less muscle and you've got a lower metabolic rate, and you'll just put the fat back on even quicker than before. So that's one reason why you go on a diet, you lose weight, come off the diet, pile it back on again. That was more of a physical reason. There are lots of mental reasons why your brain doesn't like dieting. So basically, as soon as you deprive yourself of anything really, you tend to want it more. So whenever something is in short supply, it becomes desirable to us. And they've done experiments where they've offered people biscuits out of a nearly empty tin and a full tin. And people actually rate the biscuits from the nearly empty tin as tastier because they think they're scarce, they're in short supply, so they seem better. It's called the scarcity principle, and advertisers obviously use it all the time. You've got only so many of these wonderful sofas left, the sale ends this weekend, and people fall for it. People think if it's scarce, they want it. So obviously the more you deprive yourself of a particular type of food or of any food, the more your brain says you want it. And if you try not to think about food, you'll find you're thinking about it all the time, as anyone who's ever been on a diet will realise. They actually did an experiment where they told people not to think about a white bear. It's quite a famous experiment. And I mean, normally you might not think about a white bear from one year to the next, but as soon as these people were told, don't think about a white bear, that's all they thought about. White bears were floating in all over the place. Look out the window, there's a white bear. So basically, even after they said to these people, you're allowed to think about a white bear now, you can think about it all you like, they were still thinking about white bears, and that happened for quite a long time. So there's no point doing a diet and trying not to think about food. It's all you'll think about.